say it because no one else is. The Dutch have a crazy contribution to electronic music as a whole. Like, look what happened when they got their hands on it. In 2025, it's easy to forget the origins of important sounds because we've heard them so much already, used in so many different applications musically. That's why it's cool to look at the Netherlands, because it's such a small place, but they've contributed quite a few famous sounds. On top of the famous sounds, there were also three main subgenres of electronic music that birthed itself there: gabber, hardstyle, and Dutch house music. Fun fact, did you know that the Netherlands have the largest outdoor electronic music festival in the world? I didn't know that. Oh, anyhow, all that was just to preface the fact that I've been listening to a lot of Dutch electronic music kind of by accident over the years, and I didn't even realize all these artists were Dutch, and it kind of explains how it's rubbed off in some of my creations. I like the use of dub chords and the faster tempos, also the distorted kick drums, and just overall groovy rhythms. The other day, I set out to make a track with exactly those elements in mind. In this video, I'm going to break down how I made that track. I hope you can find something interesting in this and maybe be inspired to create yourself. Hey, what up? It's Ant, and welcome back to my project file. The BPM is 149 up here in the top left corner. The view that you see of Ableton right now is the session window, which allows me to play my different loops in different sequences. I then can record it directly from this screen into the other window, which is this, the arrangement window. And then I continue to tweak the different sections from there. I'll be breaking down the track that you heard in the intro based on the order in which I added every single instrument. So it was the drums, and then the kick drum, and then I did the bass. Anyhow, I'm just going to break it down like that, and I hope you can learn a thing or two along the way. Since I believe gain staging is important and it's good to have headroom, I also believe in having a good mastering chain, because that's how we get our loudness and clarity back after obeying some of the rules of gain staging. The drums that you're hearing in this group are what we started with as the foundation of this track. I wanted to make sure that I had an established groove, so that's why I started with the drums first. It guaranteed that I was going to lock in a certain swing and even suggest ideas for the rhythm of the bass that I was going to add later down the road. At first, I had a simple groove laid out with three different drum sounds: a clap, a closed hi-hat, and an open hi-hat. But then I went and I added a drum loop that I have. The drum loop was super filtered out, and I was able to manipulate it even further by messing with the transients, tightening it up. And what you can do as a trick is put it really low down in volume compared to the other drums that you have, and then you can infinitely improve the groove of your drums. I took it a step further, and I extracted the groove from the actual loop that I was using here, and I applied the groove in Ableton to the MIDI rhythm of the other drums that I had already added. That was making those other drums fit with this loop that I've just added. Does that make sense? I feel like I just confused myself even. With the whole drum loop established, I felt like it still needed a little bit of anxiety-inducing rhythm, so I added one more closed hi-hat to fill in some counter rhythm. Now it was time for the kick. And I didn't plan originally on having a distorted kick like this, but I was surfing through sounds and I realized that I have these cool ravey distorted kicks that I never use. I felt like there was no time better than now to bust those out. If you're having trouble getting your kick drum to pop, I would suggest messing around with a compressor that looks like this. You can set it to a very quick attack and a slow release, and it will directly enhance how punchy your kick drum is. I did a little bit of EQing. I also turned the bass frequencies mono with that utility effect. To me, it was still sounding a little thin, so later on I added two more layers which filled out lower end. I'd like to mention that my kick drums are made out of two different kick drum sounds layered into one MIDI trigger in the instrument rack. To add the low end, I duplicated the kick drum and I filtered out all the high end and just made it a low kick, and I added some deep saturation with this kick tight preset from the Corpus effect. It gave it some cojones. That third kick drum channel in the middle is just a reinforcement overdriven kick sound. It's just adding a little bit more grit for that one section that I wanted to have it play at. So now that it was time to figure out a bass line, I went into Native Instruments VST library here that came with my complete control. In the Monarch synth, there was a cool preset that I ended up messing around with, and it helped me come up with this bass line. This bass was also lacking cojones, so I already knew that I needed to duplicate it and reinforce it with another synth that had a little bit more sub-frequency going on. The original was quite bright, so I just turned that down with a little bit of EQ, and I tried to tame what I could with a compressor there. That's the duplicate that you hear, which is a sub-ear preset. Alright, so that's two channels playing the bass line at once. The effects processing is pretty simple. There's a little bit of sidechain action for when the kick drum's playing. There's this EQ here, this OTT effect, which is very helpful, and then a Pultec EQ boosting overall fullness and the low end and mid-range. Lastly, there's a limiter, making sure that it's just sitting at a specific headroom for me that I can control. I almost said I enjoy. I don't know if I enjoy it. So with all those kick layers together, for that one section at its peak, so the next thing I added was this offbeat bass that makes it sound very trancy. I made this out of two different one-shot bass sounds layered in together until I liked the balance between the two. I triggered them all by instrument rack. This is what it sounds like without effect processing. And then with the chain back on. Even though I liked the sound of it without the effects chain on, I added it so I could ensure that the sound of that offbeat bass would come through on smaller speaker systems. It took touching higher end frequencies and boosting those and sacrificing some sub bass in order to get them to pop. Up until this point, I had established a bass groove and a strong drum section. So I felt like the hard part was mostly done and I could start to fill in the missing pieces. This is where I could also do things that were characteristic as well to Dutch house music, which is looking for funky, glunky sounds, even funny stuff. If it rhythmically works, it works. So these chord hits that you hear that are delayed and spaced out, I made them spaced out by adding a little bit of delay and a little bit of overdrive enhancing the delay afterwards. I found this rave stab sound and I came up with a rhythm to play, and that was being done when I was listening to the drums. I didn't just come up with that while listening to the metronome. Maybe I could have. Anyhow, this is my favorite part right here, which is that organ kind of chord preset. I don't know what it is. It's an Ableton stock preset. It sounds like an organ or something like that, and I was playing some stabby notes with that, enhancing it with OTT and reverb and delay. Oh, I am wrong. There is a compressor on there doing like a slow release, fast attack situation again, making it sound very percussive. And then I got that reverb delay combo that I'm talking about. Delay after the reverb makes it sound way different than delay before the reverb. This is a part that I called the drop, but I actually used it for the intro and transitional moments.
Wait a minute, cut this shit.
It was a playground of sound effects, basically, that some I went with and some I didn't.
shit.
The vocals I ended up pitching down quite a bit in the arrangement process. But the big thing here was this riser called rave signal, and then this white noise that I was able to turn into a riser of sorts as well. You take an Ableton analog instrument here and turn off the oscillators and just have the white noise on. And then to get the riser effect, you would put some panning effects of some sorts on, and then you would also do an auto filter automation sweeping downwards, and that would also make it feel like it's getting swept downwards as well. The last little thing I added was a snare roll, which was just a snare MIDI just getting triggered by a MIDI arpeggiator. So the arrangement process was pretty simple. I just recorded my idea in from the session window, and then from there I would go in and delete certain parts of the drums to make them slowly come in. At this point, I felt like my track was fully laid out, but it needed some enhancements to make it sound interesting. That's when I decided it was time to add some effects and automate those, kind of like a DJ would manipulate the track in a live setting. The first effect you heard was a delay effect that I put right on the master, and I had it acting as a transitional element. The next thing I had right on the master was a filter, which is kind of a simple concept. My idea for arranging this track was to have a short track that would just run into the next track per se if it was on an EP. Another aspect is that it is quite DJable. If it is short and sweet like that, you can just keep fading into another song. Something I can improve upon is learning how to arrange these tracks a little bit more interestingly. I don't know. Let me know if I did all right. I feel like I could have more intense drops, take more elements out, and have it more stripped down. That's something I would do differently next time. Here is where the filter automations can be really heard. Another filter directly on the snare drum, which is making it sound like it's rising from the dead. The last little bit of effects processing automations that I did was right on the intro. I did a combination of phasing, bit reduction, and some spectral frequency modulating. All in all, it was pretty subtle, but it, to me, made it sound like it was moving the whole sound around in a cool way that I liked, and otherwise felt like it was too boring without. My effects chain for the master consisted of this Pultec EQ going into a LA2A doing light compression. And it fed into a series of 2 limiters, which was overall handling the transients in such a way that it was giving me the loudest possible mix that I could achieve. The first limiter was smashing the signal, and then the second one was bringing up the volume. All in all, those 2 limiters were using the headroom that I provided it to give me a loud and clean mix. If you're interested in a Ableton stock mastering chain, you can send me an email and I will send you over something that I have crafted myself. If you are looking for drum sounds to make a track like this, let me know, and I think I will put together a sort of kit as well. I can also release that to help out with the creative process. If you're looking to bump this track, you can find it on my Bandcamp channel and maybe soon on streaming platforms.